Hello and welcome to another episode of the DJ Project Criterion Collection. And today we're going to talk about Spine 167, the Complete Monterey Pop Festival. This is another box set. Like I said before, I count box sets as one instead of however many numbers are on there. So once again, there's a number here, even though there are numbers here. And so these are these are actually 3 films in this set, plus about, I think it's supposed to be an hour or 2 hours worth of outtake performances, but they're all from the Monterey Pop Festival, and these were all directed by D.A. Pennebaker. Now, the Monterey Pop Festival, it was a one-time concert that was organized by Lou Adler, by producer-manager Lou Adler, and member of the Mamas and Papas, John Phillips. It lasted for 3 days, from June 16th to the 18th in 1967, and it is considered one of the events that marked the beginning of the so-called Summer of Love. It was the first major rock festival of its kind. It set the template for other festivals, including the famous/infamous Woodstock Music Festival 2 years later. And this particular festival is quite significant because of who showed up. Now, for the film itself, it only covers a really small portion, and even with all the outtakes, it doesn't really encapsulate all that went on in those 3 days. But it's the best. But what is preserved is, you think, wow, that's really quite special. The artists that okay, so first off, I think it's probably best to talk about the first film and the main film, Monterey Pop itself. This was the feature film that covered some of the major performances from that festival, and this was released in 1968. So the artists that appear on the film in order, the Mamas and Papas, Canned Heat, Simon and Garfunkel, Hugo Masekela, Jefferson Airplane, Big Brother and the Holding Company, so this includes Janis Joplin, Eric Burdon and the Animals, The Who, Country Joe and the Fish, Otis Redding, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and another song from Mamas and Papas, and finally concluding with Ravi Shankar. So right there, I mean, that's and actually these are very important performances in the history of popular music. This was not the first major appearance, but certainly a very wide appearance on the part of Janis Joplin. It was also a very important performance for Otis Redding, and it ended up coincidentally sadly being the last public performance he did before he died. And I forget if this performance came after or before Sitting on the Dock of the Bay was released. Anyway, so that's a pretty big deal. This is the performance where The Who, well, of course, by that point, The Who, I think I'd already had that reputation of trashing their instruments, but if you've ever seen the concert film / documentary retrospective film, The Kids Are Alright, the last, near the end, uses the Monterey Pop performance, where guitars are smashed and the drum kit just is all kicked and disassembled to bits, while Keith Moon just has very few pieces of the kit left after the destruction. This is after my generation, And then this was also the performance where Jimi Hendrix burns his guitar on stage in a... the sexual innuendos are very, very present in that little scene. In fact, it's probably my favorite scene because of just the just the sheer performance of it, not just the innuendo part of it, but just the virtuosity. I mean, this is a guy that's that's playing the guitar while it's behind his back, and he's just swinging it around and doing all these tricks and everything. And then and he actually painted, or either he painted it or somebody else painted the body. I mean, it's a beautiful looking guitar. And then in the end, he pours lighter fluid on it and burns it, and then smashes it. But the part of that I really like is there's this one reaction shot where you see this woman kind of looking at just shock and possibly disgust. Like, what am I just seeing here? This is odd. Yeah, that was another major performance for him. Actually, I think the first big performance for the Jimi Hendrix Experience. In fact, there's even a longer list of cancellations and no shows. I believe the Grateful Dead was originally scheduled, but when they found out that there was a documentary being filmed, they bowed out. The Beatles were invited, but they declined because at that point their music was, certainly their newer music was too sophisticated to play live. So in their stead, Paul McCartney insisted that The Who and the Jimi Hendrix Experience show up to this. So I think Donovan was a no-show. I mean, it's a very, very extensive, and I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. That's what the internet's for. It's not just porn. It's information. Go out and go forth and seek out if you so desire. Anyways, so back to the films, and actually that's mostly what I want to cover. The film itself is, I think, one of the best, if not the best, concert films ever made. And here's why. Well, for starters, it's given the performers I mentioned, and you actually do see these in the film itself. All the performances have a certain intensity to them. I mean, these are performances that are that were all done with passion and daring. And yes, you don't have to actually burn your guitar in order to do this. I mean, there are plenty of other performances where that was not an issue, where trashing your instruments were not the thing. In fact, Otis Redding's performance is really was quite electric, and it's only the sliver that you see in that film. It's something really special, and you hear the last part of one song, "Shake." And then the next song you hear is I feel. Hold on, sorry. I've been loving you too long, and it's a very, very just a very soulful performance in the musical genre sense of the word. There's definitely a lot of soul, so the performances are great. Which actually, talking about that performance leads into the other thing, what makes it great. It's also the way it was shot. It was all shot with 60mm cameras, and I think there were 7 or 8 camera operators going on at any one time, and there were some that were placed in front of the stage, and then there were some that were placed behind the stage, and then I think there were a few out into the audience. And with the exceptions of D.A. Pennebaker, I believe he was one of the camera operators, and Albert Maysles was one of the camera operators, one of the godfathers of American documentaries. I believe the rest of them were not professional cameramen. Of course they were told, like, how do you load the camera and how do you how do you focus? How do you set up the apertures and everything? I'm sure there was that, but they weren't professional cameramen. And I think what makes it special is that there is a difference between obviously there's a difference between a professional photographer taking a photograph and someone who knows very little about photography taking a picture. A professional photographer is fully aware of all the various aspects that go into taking a picture. He'll think about aperture. He'll think about focus length. He'll think about focal lengths. He'll think about daylight. If he's shooting on film, he's gonna definitely think about film stock. And if he's shooting by means of digital, he's going to think about equivalent color temperature and ISO equivalence. He's going to think about composition. He's going to think about color. He's going to think about exposure. All those things. And everything is going to add up to an image. And whereas someone who's less versed in photography, it may be interesting, but there's some limitations. Now, I make it sound like this is going to look like an amateur film. It doesn't. And I think for starters, there were enough people who knew what they were doing to help make it seem blended. In a way, this is like a film that uses a combination of actors and non-actors. The actors will help maintain a certain professionalism and structure, whereas the non-actors will add some freshness and a sense of spontaneity. Which, going back to the way it was shot, when you're not thinking too much about aperture, things like aperture and focus. I mean, obviously you want the thing to be focused, but you're not thinking of it in terms of the image. You're just pointing the camera at the performance and you're just reacting to it. And there's a lot of moments where you feel less like this is a camera shooting an image, and you feel more like this is more like an audience member reacting to the music. Which, let's face it, concert films, there's not a whole lot to them. Because all it is, at its core, is basically pointing a camera at a performer on stage. That's it. And there's not a whole lot you can do. It's just doing that. Yes, you can shoot it handheld. You can put it on a stick. You can set up multiple cameras at various points to get different angles. You can even put it on cranes and dollies and tracks and have it move around and such. But really, there's not a whole lot you can do. And really, what makes a concert film is the performance itself. It's all really dependent on the performers. But this one stands out because it's one of the first concert films. Of course, the first ones are always going to be looked on as something special. But because it was shot in this handheld way, and that there were some non-professional cameramen there, it feels like you're not just shooting. To them, it's not just shooting the image and making sure that it exposes really well. There's a sense of engagement, and if you feel like there is an engagement with the subject, you are engaged. It's a two-way, or another way of thinking of it is if the cameraman is more like the audience, it feels like there's less distance. If you think of it this way, you have the subject, whatever it is, you have the cameraman who's more technically minded and making sure that there's a good image, and then there's the audience. The cameraman can or cannot get in the way, and the best cameramen are the ones that have an artistic sensibility too. But here in this case, the cameraman is responding more emotionally, is engaged in the performance, and thus it's more, so the cameraman is closer to you. So really, it almost feels like there's no cameraman at all. The relationship is much more direct, and now combine that with the performance in of itself that's quite engaging, then you have something really special. I was going to talk about Otis Redding, like a good example. Oh, actually, I'll talk about this. And I'll mention it again later when I do have some points that I want to make. But anyway, like for instance, with Otis Redding, when he's singing "I've Been Loving You for Too Long," you can really the energy. You can really feel the energy in that performance. In fact, at a certain point where during the song, there's a little very minor drum break and kind of a series of horn stabs. So it's like da boom ba boom ba, and as he's performing, he's just like, play that one more time, and he's like, ow, and it's you can you can really feel that, and at a certain, you hear the audience react to it so strongly, and it feels less like watching a film and more like you're almost actually there. You're vicariously living the performance. Now again, watching a film does not make you, depending on the subject, it does not instantly make you an expert on the subject. By watching this, I cannot say that I attended the Monterey Pop Festival. For starters, I was not born in 1967, so that invalidates it right there. But I can say that I saw a really good performance, and I can feel like I'm there. I know that I'm not, but because the performance itself is really intense, because the way it was shot, it feels less slick. It feels less slick and professional, and more like as if you were an audience member. Then it's really engaging. In fact, this is why I don't really like concert films all that much, because, well, one, there's only so many performances. There's only so many ways you can shoot a film, and often the way that there is, because it's so simple, there's this desire to make it super spectacular, where you want to put it on cranes and you want to do these swoops and going from low angle to high angle, and the camera moves around, and that's not interesting. Well, for starters, because nobody realistically experiences a concert like that. Unless you're strapped onto a harness and somebody pulls you around and moves you around, chances are, well, that's not going to happen. I don't think. Until that happens, that's not a realistic way of seeing a concert. And I feel that it's more that the filming of it is more slick. And I also think that sometimes the performances are more slick and professional. And I think because of that, you feel a certain detachment. Whereas, I mean, this was a festival that was it was the first and only time that this festival ever took place. I can't verify this. There may have been an idea that maybe this would be an ongoing thing, because this was it shares a similar name to the Monterey Jazz Festival that started in 1958. It's one of the longest, most consecutive, the longest consecutive jazz festivals, or certainly music festivals, ever run. And by calling it Monterey Pop, and also part of the intention is to give dignity to rock and roll and other children's records. Thank you, Tom Lehrer. To give some credibility and dignity to the art form, which is considered, that's kids' music. That's what the kids are listening to, with their hula hoops and their milkshakes and whatever else they're doing. And this is on the verge of LSD and getting high in other respects. But anyways, so it was to try to get, I don't know, the point is, I don't know if this was intended to be the start of an ongoing project, or this was really just a one-time affair and then that was it. The jury's still out on that, but this was done, obviously this was run by people who knew what they were doing, unlike Woodstock. And the sad thing is, Monterey Pop is not talked about as much. I mean, usually when you think music festivals, particularly of the 60s, most people will say automatically Woodstock. And I think that's grossly unfair. I think this is a lot more interesting. Monterey Pop is a lot more interesting than Woodstock. because of those performances. And another thing that wasn't covered, Bob Krause demonstrated the first Moog synthesizer, or Moog, I forget exactly how it's pronounced. I've heard it both ways. But anyways, there was a synthesizer demonstration, and there were some synthesizers that were bought, and so this was the start of the use of more electronic musics and how that affected popular music and so on. So it was pretty significant. It's quite important if you care anything about popular music at all. This is an important moment to look at. It's like in looking at world history and knowing when the Europeans went across the Atlantic Ocean, or in the case of American history, knowing the Revolutionary War or the American Revolution. It's that kind of milestone, and it's often overlooked, and it's a shame. And I think one might think that the reason for Criterion putting this out is a way of sort of vindicating that and saying that this is a festival worth noting. Other things about the film itself, it is a genuine documentary. Documentary is a term, like a lot of words that are just casually used. It seems to be this umbrella term that seems to embrace a lot of other films. To me, a documentary is a film that documents an event as it's happening. That's really what it is. And it's not a film that presents information in a visual way, like an informative film, like what's, name any television special or informational TV show. Those aren't documentaries. Or there's a visual essay, which is what I would say, like Godard's films that he made in the 70s, or Michael Moore, or any of that ilk. Those aren't documentaries. I mean, to me, a documentary is just capturing a moment as it's happening. And now, as I'm thinking about it, yeah, it does get kind of blurred. Like if the subject is about a particular thing and so forth, but it kind of blurs between documentary and informational, and I get that. But I will say that this film is a genuine documentary. It was there at a particular place at a particular time, and it captured it, and it did it really well. And this is what helped kickstart D.A. Pennebaker's career, and he would continue to do that, and he would continue to make more documentaries. So in a way, Pennebaker can be called one of the godfathers, even though he started more later than say the Maysles brothers. Certainly, you look at his films, and if you're ever serious about wanting to make documentaries, he's a go-to guy. Along with the Maysles brothers, along with Barbara Koppel, and much earlier, probably the godfather of the whole thing, Jean Rouch, who was not only a big influence on documentaries, but also on the French Nouvelle Vague, and particularly Godard. And then finally, as far as this film, it's a really good example of film editing, and in two things, and you learn two things. One, you learn how to use insert shots or cutaways within and between performances. Because when you're watching this film, it's not just you're looking at performances. You're also looking at shots of people sitting in the audience, people camping out, people eating, people walking around, to really get a sense of what happens. Now, it's... it doesn't always match the performances. Like if you see a performance that occurred on day 2 in the afternoon, sometimes I don't think there's anything quite incongruous where if a performance happens in the afternoon, it doesn't suddenly cut to a shot in the middle of the night. But I think it's safe to assume that there was probably some shots that if a performance happened on day 3 in the afternoon, there's probably going to be some shots that happened on day 2 in the afternoon. So But that's not what's really important. You want to get a sense of, you want to get a little bit of a flavor as to what was going on that particular moment. And so it was, you know, there's a good use of inserts and cutaways and performances to, one, kind of maybe perhaps break the monotony a little bit, but also to give you a sense of what happened on that day. So, certainly for those who weren't able to make it for a variety of reasons. For me, I didn't even exist, so there was no way I could make it there. But I could. But in watching it, I can get a flavor of, okay, this is what happened. And then the other example is for the performance itself, and I knew I was going to go back to Otis Redding, is when you switch from is if you're shooting an event or a subject in multiple angles, if you have multiple cameras set up, it's knowing when to switch from one angle to the next. And I mentioned the Otis Redding performance of I've Been Loving You for Too Long, is because much of the performance, there's a point in the performance where it lingers on this one shot, this one angle, which is in the way back of the stage. And it's looking out, facing the drummer, and Otis in front. And in fact, at the center of this is this really bright stage light. And as Otis Redding's performing this song, he occasionally blocks the light. So it goes back, so his motion creates this back and forth thing, where it goes from this really bright light that just completely envelops the image to where you see this, essentially this white card, almost this white square, because it's just nothing but light. And then occasionally when he blocks it, you just see his outline, this backlit silhouette of him, and it just goes back and forth between that as he's singing this song. And the shot stays there. It stays there for a good fair chunk of this. I think it lasts, I want to say it lasts for about maybe 30, 45 seconds, maybe a minute. But maybe not that long. Probably like 30, 45 seconds. And it just stays on that shot. Now, for what? Now you could say, now why would you want to stay on that shot? Well, for starters, it is a very interesting shot. It's an unusual angle to see it from that far back and actually in that prominent, and you can imagine it's a pretty prominent spot. It's in the back of the stage, and you're behind everybody. So it's a very interesting angle to start. Whereas most concert films tend to be more in front. It's either like at the front of the stage, or more in the middle, or even in the back. So the position itself is really unusual. The elements that are within the shot also make it interesting, because you have the stage light and you have Otis, and because his performance is so dynamic, he's not sitting still. He's moving around. He's emoting this. He's performing this song, and it gives him this motion and this energy and such. It creates this interaction between him or when you see in the image, because what you see in the image is this interaction of seeing him and then seeing the light and going back and forth, and it adds something to it. And it's something that if it engages you, if it's really interesting and captivating, you want to stay on it as long as possible. And then it does cut away to other angles and so forth. So it doesn't just linger on that shot. It lingers on it long enough so that you can get a feeling for that performance, and in a different way, in a way that you don't normally see. And also considering that this ended up being the last public performance of Otis Redding, it takes on a whole, it takes on another layer of meaning. In fact, having that stage light, and especially the moments where he's blocking it, so you're seeing this silhouette, it gives it a spectral feel. It feels very spectral and even ghost-like. And then it hits you that, oh, he's going to eventually die in I think it's within months, I want to say. when he does. Again, I could be wrong, but it's a very and that comes and now when it was edited, did that come through the editor's mind? Hopefully not. Well, actually, it probably did because it was released in 1968, so probably there was that probably did inform some of it. But even if it didn't, let's say it did not, it is an interesting shot that you want to see. I think that is probably worth showing, and so it's the right amount of time where you get the impression, but it doesn't linger too long. It's the right balance of you don't want to have it too short that you just see it and then it just then it brushes by, but also you don't want to have it too long so that it becomes monotonous and boring and wears out its novelty. So again, it's a really good example. I mean, there are plenty of films that are also good examples of film editing, but I would say this one is a very easy one to watch, and it should be very clear. You'll get those concepts more clearly and more easily in watching this. So I would say that it's a great example of film editing. Now, I've talked a lot about this film. There's another spine number in association with this, and that is Jimi Plays Monterey and Shake Otis at Monterey. This is basically the complete, if not near complete, performances of these two artists. It is what the title, it is what it says on the can. You see all of Jimi Hendrix's songs that he performs, and you see all of Otis Redding's songs. I think Hendrix is more complete in terms of performance and I say this because there is a significant time difference between the two. I think for Jimi Plays Monterey, it lasts for 40 minutes, and Otis Redding's lasts for I think 20. And I don't know if it was a case where Otis Redding had a shorter set list than Hendrix, and thus explains the time difference, or if Redding did have an equal set list. The footage that was shot was not particularly good, or things weren't ready, or whatever the case. So I think this is a case where Redding had a shorter set list than Hendrix, and that explains the time difference. But nevertheless, these are complete performances. So in this respect, if you want to see more of Jimi Hendrix besides him playing Wild Thing and burning his guitar, and if you want to see more of Otis Redding than singing "I've Been Loving You for Too Long," and also the tail end of "Shake." I think in this case you do hear him perform the entire song in this. So so you watch that, and then the last disc, which doesn't have a number. These are all the outtake performances. In fact, the the artists that are represented here are the Association, more Big Brother and the Holding Company, the Blues Project, Buffalo Springfield, and David Crosby is included in there. In the Monterey Pop film, he does show up, and he's testing the mics, and he says, "Wow, we got a great sound system this time." And actually, that was another big contribution that Monterey Pop did to rock festivals, was improve the sound system, and hopefully inspired other festivals to follow suit. The Buffalo Butterfield Blues Band, the Byrds, Country Joe and the Fish, the Electric Flag, Jefferson Airplane, Al Cooper, the Mamas and the Papas, Laura Nyro, I think, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Simon and Garfunkel, Tiny Tim, and The Who. So these are more performances. And like I said, if you learn more about the festival itself, there's a lot more artists that are there. And actually there is an essay that D.A. Pennebaker writes explaining that, yes, even though this is called the Complete Monterey Pop Festival, he also adds that it's nearly complete. This is a case where it wouldn't sell well if he says, this is the nearly complete Monterey Pop Festival. So it's as complete as it's going to get, given what was shot, how it was shot, how many days, all these things. I mean, this is like the most you're going to get. And considering that considering that the film alone, the feature film that was made alone, had the performances and even had the moments that were probably worth remembering. Janis Joplin, Otis Redding, Jimi Hendrix, Ravi Shankar. Yeah, it's kind of eerie to watch this again, and a few months ago he died. But to see that alone is just is worth it, and this is just a nice bonus. So I would say now recommendations. Again, if you care about popular music in any way, and even if you don't like any of the artists on there whatsoever, let's say you don't like any of this, I would say it's definitely worth viewing. Certainly Monterey Pop is worth watching. For the reasons that I just stated, that it's one of the best, if not the best, concert films ever made. It's a genuine documentary. You get it's inspiring in terms of cinematography, not because it's slicker, but because it's capturing a moment. It's capturing a moment in time, and it allows you to connect with the image, certainly emotionally, and it's the combination of having a great performance to start, and then also having someone behind you to actually engage, not just film it, not just say, okay, this looks nice, but to actually even feel some energy, like, wow, this is a really engaging performance. I'm really into this. And if the cameraman's feeling it, chances are you're going to feel it also. So it's a great it's a great example of that. So it's definitely worth it for Monterey Pop. Now, the last thing, I promise, this is what Criterion has done as far as their on some of their box sets, is that they've separated some of their titles so that if the thought of getting the complete package is quite intimidating, you can get separate titles. And in this particular case, you can get Monterey Pop and the two other films, Jimi Plays Monterey and Shake Otis at Monterey. You can get those discs separately. The notion being that if you are a Hendrix Redding fan and you just want to see those performances, you get that disc. If you're not a big fan of any particular artist, if you just want the film, you can just get that. And this was for both DVD, and it was reissued in Blu-ray, and it follows the same thing. Now, what I've read about the Blu-ray is the outtake performances are part of the Monterey Pop. So I believe this is how you can purchase it. You can get all of them at once in the box set, or you can get Monterey Pop and Jimi and Otis separate. And then with the Monterey Pop, it includes the outtake performances. I would say that, personally, this is one of those cases where it's worth going big, because at least you have the option. You get everything. You have the option, even if you don't watch the other material. At least it's all there. And if you're curious, if you want to see more, or if somebody comes over and is a really big fan of, say, The Who or Simon and Garfunkel, you can say, "Hey, I got this," and then you can show him that, and he goes, "Oh wow, this is nice." So you can do that. So I would say that, and in the end, it probably is probably more cost effective to buy the complete set than it is to do separate. But that's just me. I know other people feel differently for different reasons in how they purchase stuff, and in that sense, it's good that the option is there. So so those are your choices. That's what I would recommend. So again, if you care anything about popular music, especially American popular music, especially American rock, it's definitely worth watching in that respect. And then in other respects, it's a great concert film. It's a great documentary, and so that Monterey Pop, or the near complete Monterey Pop, the Complete Monterey Pop Festival. And until next time, take care.